Hello and welcome to today's talk, which is called Salacious Songs, How a Bengali Dance Went Viral in the 19th Century. Our speaker today is Dr. Richard Williams, who is a lecturer in ethnomusicology at SOAS. He earlier held the Leverhulme Early Career Fellowship at Oxford between 2015 and 17. He also studied theology at the University of Oxford and then went on to receive his PhD from King's College London. And he's currently finalizing his manuscript on the circulation of musicians, genres, and musicologists in Upper India and Bengal between 1750 and 1900. Over to you.
That was such a detailed introduction. It's amazing. Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be back. I love these sessions, and huge thanks to Mohammed Ahmadullah for making all of this possible, and thank you, Priyanka, for that introduction. This is a sort of loose overview paper of a topic I've been working on for a while, inspired by the British Library Collections, which is Priyanka's home institution. And I wanted to call this, well, it's a complicated topic, so I wanted to give it a slightly snappier title, so I've called it How a Bengali Dance Went Viral in the 19th Century. And obviously that raises a few questions and problems. A lot of people would wonder whether it's possible to talk about things going viral so long ago. We're very used to that idea now. Viral has recently been entered into the Oxford English Dictionary as a term, and so we're used to this idea of images, songs, videos circulating very quickly, and that's really the key essence of the term viral, the fact that things can travel very quickly but also globally. So the question is, could things circulate that rapidly and that widely in the 19th century, long before digital technology? The answer, of course, is no. But when you do investigate how things are circulating, it is surprising how quickly things travel, and certainly how far a range they can cross. I'm going to give you one example just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about before I move into the main topic today. And that's an example of a song that it was actually written originally by the Persian poet Hafez in the 14th century. And well, the key motif in this poem, this ghazal, is the recurring refrain in Persian, taza ba taza, nau ba nau. And you'll see here a translation of it into English from 1867, where taza ba taza, nau ba nau has been rendered freshly fresh and newly new. And this particular verse received lots of translations in the 19th century. Lots of people were very interested in it. It was widely published. And you have to ask why. And it was mostly because of what Europeans found when they were in South Asia. So this 14th century Persian song was one of the key songs in the repertoires of singers and dancers in South Asia. And we have to remember that musicians and dancers were highly multilingual, highly proficient in lots of different repertoires, and this song really caught the imagination of Europeans who heard it, particularly because those of you who can read Persian, you know, this refrain, taza ba taza, no ba no, comes up again and again and again, freshly fresh and newly new. So it's very easy to sort of recognize it, even if you weren't particularly familiar with Persian, you could pick up on this refrain. And Catherine Schofield at King's College London has been working on this song for a while, and she's identified the importance of one figure, Sophia Plowden, who is an English woman who was based in North India in the late 18th century. And Sophia Plowden was fascinated by Indian music, and she collaborated with a courtesan from North India called Khananjan and collected Khananjan's repertoire, her collection of songs. And she compiled all of these songs into a beautiful manuscript, which is now in Cambridge. And apart from the lyrics, she also asked someone on a harpsichord to have all of the songs arranged as sheet music, so you could play it on the harpsichord or later on the piano potentially. And apparently Sophia Plowden used to dress up as a courtesan and perform these songs herself. She didn't know Persian, but she learnt the tunes, she learnt the lyrics, and she used to perform these songs. And what's particularly striking is this song was very widely received in the British Isles. It was published many times in books like the Oriental Miscellany, which were books for people to play tunes on the harpsichord in the comfort of their own home. And the harpsichord artist Jane Chapman has recently taken that song, Taza ba taza no ba no, and arranged it for harpsichord. Taken the arrangement that Sophia Plowden and others had prepared for harpsichord and has now played it. So this is how Taza ba taza no ba no sounded on the harpsichord when it had been translated from an Indian courtesan into an English 18th century harpsichord piece. Yes, there we go. That last bit was the no, but no. Anyway, so it really was a bit of a stretch of the imagination to take what an Indian courtesan would have been singing and turn it into this. But it did really well in the British Isles. Lots of English families were playing this song. And this was in the 1780s onwards. And what I found was, 90 years later, in 1873, when the Shah of Persia, Nasir-ad-Din Shah Qajar, visited Britain, they arranged a whole set of entertainments for him, and they took him to Covent Garden and brought out a whole load of English opera singers and told them to sing for him Taza ba taza no ba no. So, because he was Persian, and obviously he would really appreciate some Hafez. Who knows what he would have thought of it? It probably wouldn't have sounded like anything he would have been familiar with before. But what's very nice is this circulation of a 14th century verse from Persia through Central Asia into South Asia, where it becomes very popular over the centuries, where it gets taken back to Britain, where it is played for a Persian Shah. The reason I know about this particular concert in Covent Garden is because I read about it in Kolkata in a newspaper that was very popular in the 19th century called the Urdu Guide. And so again, it's this case of constant circulation, the fact that they're talking in Kolkata about a Persian song that had been picked up from India and was now being played to a Persian Shah in London. And so I think there is a case to start thinking about how ideas can spread in very remarkable ways and how a song, in some respects at least, can go viral. Anyway, that's just to give you a sense of the kind of questions that we can ask about these musical objects and how they travel. I've been working on a specific example, which I'm trying to do a similar kind of history for, and this is called Kempta. And retracing the history of Kempta has been particularly interesting, and I think it helps me in my work try to make sense of a few things. First of all, I'm interested in how we can think through popular culture and sort of popular music making in the 19th century, and think through fashionable trends and how fashions and trends can spread and circulate. It's also a useful way of providing a case study for how people consumed music in 19th century India, and to think through musical technologies. And by that, I mean, these days we're very used to all of the other media forms that go around a piece of music. We're used to the idea of music journalism, blogs, comments on YouTube videos, websites that discuss lyrics like genius.com, and we sort of take for granted that these are all, new phenomena. But they're really not, and so I'm trying to look at 19th century materials in print, such as songbooks, manuals on how to play instruments, essays about urban lifestyles, satirical poems, and I'm trying to read them as clues about musical culture and musical consumption. And what I've found over the course of this project, looking for this musical form called Kempter, is that you don't end up with a nice, neat, linear history of the form. You actually get a much messier but more interesting picture. So the obvious question I'm sure you're asking is, what is Kempter? Kempter was primarily known as a dance form and a song genre, and it appears to have emerged primarily in Bengal from the 1830s, and it picks up and becomes incredibly popular, as you'll see. The name seems to have come primarily from Kempter Tal, which is well known today. It's sometimes thought of today as a variant of Dadra Tal. For those of you who don't know about rhythms in North Indian music, we now have the advantages of YouTube, where you can have lots of YouTube tutorials explaining what tals are. So let's just listen quickly to Kempter Tal. And later on, I'll show you some texts which sort of complicate this. But one of the assumptions that is made about Kempter Tal is that it was a rhythm really well suited for particular kinds of dance. And Shumanta Banerjee, a very important and influential scholar of popular culture in 19th century Kolkata, talks about Kempter and talks about how it flourished as a very gritty urban street genre. And he talks about it as not being an elite genre, but very much belonging to the popular masses, the chotolok, rather than the bodrolok. And there are a few problems with that characterization, which I'll get into in a minute. But I was trying to find an early written reference to it, because usually things exist for a long time before someone actually puts it down on the page and says, yes, this thing exists. The earliest that I found so far is from, oh, no, not him. Let's just go to the next one. There we go. Oh, okay, yeah. So it's from 1840. And in 1840, there was a Bengali journalist who wrote a column in a newspaper. And he was weighing in on a big debate that was happening, because basically some of the Christian communities in Kolkata were trying to develop new performing arts that would help their missionary work and help spread Christianity in Bengal. And one of the forms that they were working on was called the Krishna Leela. And the idea is that you would take Leela, which is a Hindu performing tradition of telling a narrative and staging it and dramatizing it, and you would take that form and do a Christian version of it. Anyway, and there was a big debate about how appropriate this was. Some of the new Bengali Christians were developing this form, and some people thought it was a bit risque, and there was a big argument about whether this was really appropriate for Indian Christianity. Anyway, so he weighed in on the debate, and he said it would therefore be advisable, in order to give a taste of the pleasures of the Krishna Leela to their native fellow subjects, that they should raise a subscription for having Musalmani dancing girls instructed in the mode of conducting it. If indeed those girls who practice Kempter dancing were taught the Krishna Leela, of which we have, however, heard no proposal as yet, they might tread upon the breasts of the assembly, i.e. prove all powerfully alluring and subduing, and find a ready entrance by the charms of their song for the praises of the Son of God. I think he's being very tongue-in-cheek, obviously. But what is interesting is this is an early reference, 1840, to Kempter dancing. He's associating it with the Muslim dancing girls of Kolkata. And what's great is the English translator of this piece in an English newspaper provided a note on Kempter dancing, a species of not over-modest performance, which cannot be further described. Anyway, and that's just begging for someone to describe it, which fortunately we have a better, richer, fuller description from 22 years later. So skipping ahead a little, there's a very famous work on Kolkata by Koli Proshino Shingho, Hutom Ponchan Noksha. Anyway, and he talks about Kempter 4 times, and I've done some new translations of these sections. So he's describing the pleasures of the city of Kolkata. So he says, the scent of jasmine flowers wafted with a gentle breeze, so that the city became heady with it. On both sides of the road, a Kempter dance was being rehearsed in a house, and many people came to a halt in the street to gawp. Hearing the cling and clang of the ankle bells and cymbals, they revelled in a heavenly delight. And then somewhere else he says, Kempter is a really astonishing dance. The important babus of the city, so sort of the elite playboys of the city, the important babus of the city spend almost every Sunday watching it in their gardens. So many together with their sons, nephews and son-in-laws are sitting absorbed in the peerless pleasures of Kempter. Several of these babus strip the women naked and have them dance the Kempter. Sometimes, if they don't give them a kiss, they won't get a tip. No one speaks a word of this. So he's really, fueling the gossip mill. And a lot of his sketches, many of you I'm sure will have read it, but a lot of the sketches really do point a very accusing finger at the morality or the immorality of practices in Kolkata. Once in the vicinity of the city's Sham Bazaar, in the house of one aristocratic bigwig, a performance of Vidya Shundur was happening. The house's second-born Babu, also the second son of the house, was sitting and listening to the play with his clique. In front of them, Malini and Vidya were singing, "The fire of love blazes so very long. Who is he, that foreigner?" and collecting handfuls of tips. 2 16-year-old stud-bred youths, dressed as handmaids, were going round and round dancing Kempter. And then later on he says Pyalanat Babu had a great reputation in the courtesan and Kempter salons. The stud-bred thing is very mysterious. All of this text in the original is in Bengali, but he occasionally throws in English words, and in brackets he has English words, stud-bred. Not entirely clear exactly what he meant about that, but when you look through these passages, it gives us some useful clues. We know that Kempter was a very popular, astonishing dance. It is associated with the dancing girls and the courtesans. It's being performed in salons dedicated to these women. It's also being dedicated in rich men's houses, in their gardens. It's considered titillating and salacious. There's a suggestion that actually there's a link to sex work, and that these women are sexually available to the patrons as well. So it's clearly not understood as a high art form, right? This is very much sort of slightly sleazy entertainment for the powerful men of Kolkata. It also gives some useful information, though. It's not just women who are performing it. We have 16-year-old boys who are also dressed as handmaids and performing it. And they're performing it in the context of Vidya Shundur, which was a jatra type of dramatic performance, which uses dialogue and songs. And that's actually very useful. So this is where, these are 2 characters. Oops. Oh, wow. I can do that. That's exciting. Ooh. No, I can't. Okay, fine. Anyway, so this is the context of the Jatra performance is what's coming through in this. Two of the characters in it are singing a Kempter song in the middle of the Jatra performance. And that's interesting. I'll come back to this. So that's interesting because in 1847, one of we get a development which sort of pushes Kempter into the limelight. A man from Orisha, Gopal Ure, takes over a Jatra performing troupe in 1847, and he prepares a new version of the classic tale, Bidashundur. And in his libretto, his songs are usually in Tal Kempter, or sometimes in Tal Ar Kempter, which I'll talk about again. And there's a speculation that it was this important piece of literature which encouraged the popularity of Kempter songs. That doesn't quite work because we know it was existing in the 30s, but this was definitely part of it. What's interesting, and I won't go into this too much, is that this idea of this dance involving the strong rhythm, movement of the hips, going around in a circular movement, often involving male performers dressed as women for a dramatic role. This is stuff that we can still see. Again, thanks to the power of YouTube, we have a video here from Purulia, which is on the border of West Bengal and Jharkhand, and we've got a performance of what is called Kempter now. So think back to the descriptions I just read out to you, and then see what you think of this. So it's being used in this early period of the 19th century in the Jatra performances. It's also there as the repertoire of dancing girls, and it's considered, slightly salacious from that point of view. Around the 1850s, you start getting texts that are in Kempter or Ar Kempter, which are being separated from the dramas and circulating in songbooks by themselves. And usually the themes are fairly typical, seductive women, or women in this case who've been betrayed by their lover. There's a lot more to say about this particular example, but I'll skip forward a little. What is quite interesting is the phenomenon of songs associated with female singers in Kolkata, which gradually get collected and published together. You get books from 1894 onwards with pretty suggestive titles like Kolkata Besha Sangit. So the prostitute music of Kolkata, and you get a number of works like this. And Dewajit Bandyopadhyay, who has edited them, talks about a collection of 60 songs that he can find across lots of different songbooks, which were clearly part of a very popular repertoire. And Kempter features a lot in this repertoire. Here's one which kind of gives you a sense of what these lyrics are about, and much later, so 1890s, 1910s. So what is the point of eyes that don't see you? In comparison with your beauty, even Rati is ugly, Rati being the wife of the god of love, so she herself being desire. Holding her cloud black hair spread out loose, her glossy hair extends to her feet, and within that hair the moon-faced one beats even the autumn moon. Both day and night she is beautiful with a natural radiance. That body is without equal, neither thin nor fat. Even the golden flower hides in shame when it sees her. In the blossom of youth she is like a lotus bud. Taking her into his heart, the yogi forgets himself. Her waist is slender, her hips vast and full, her motion solid and swinging, pleased with herself. God created her to captivate youths, yet with a gesture, even Madan himself becomes enchanted. What's funny about these lyrics is, on the one hand, well, they're obviously quite erotic and highly sensual, but some of the motifs are quite high in a way, and they're the sort of motifs that you would get across a whole range of genres. Moon-faced ones, autumnal moons, etc. But then also a lot of it's quite gross and pretty basic. She's neither thin nor fat. Her hips are round and full, etc. So there's a sort of enthusiasm for being very upfront about the human body, which is something that Shumanto Banerjee really identifies. But what's striking about all of this is, usually when we talk about 19th century music, we think of this move where anything vaguely salacious or erotic was marginalized, pushed out of respectable society, and gradually overshadowed by a new Victorian consciousness, a new morality when it comes to women's sexuality and music. And books like this really, really complicate that. But you could say, well, this is very specific. This is groups of collectors who want to have salacious repertoires. But there's more to it than that. I've been looking through books on musical instruments and instructional manuals from the 1870s. This one is a manual on rhythms that you can perform. And what's interesting here is he talks about, so this is Keranat Gangopadhyay from 1878, and he talks about 3 forms of Kempter. He talks about Ar Kempter, which we already know about. He talks about Deshi Kempter. He calls it Deshi Kempter now, but I think that's the standard form. And then Kashmiri Kempter as well. And again, there was a real fascination with Kashmiri dancing girls. So now they've sort of created their own rhythm, which has all of the salaciousness of Kempter, but also has the allure and the fascination of being Kashmiri as well. But this isn't a salacious songbook about female singers. This is a manual on rhythms. And the way he does it is he has a section on how to, on the drum balls, the syllables that you should use in your drumming. And then he discusses specific techniques. Won't get into it, but again, it's just very specific things about how to play, how to learn rhythm. But then he also includes examples of songs. And again, these are pretty upfront. So all of these translations are very work in progress, so do bear with me. But how come you've turned up so late bringing this garland, my diamond? What a brash ox you've been since you became a whore. Keep a bit of fear in your heart. Spending the night with your lover, the sun sleeping in through the morning, losing yourself in your affairs, it's going to get you killed, my diamond. Cupid's arrows are going to get you killed. I really like that one. But again, this is playing on a standard trope about the woman who goes out and prostitutes herself. And here her friend is warning her. She's warning her about being so overly sex crazed. She's putting herself at risk. She's like a drowning person having another drink, the literal meaning of dubi dubi jod kaibi, but that being a phrase for illicit sexual liaisons. And Kedarnath was clearly not worried about this, and he was throwing them into his manual on how to play the drum, and he didn't try to sanitize the genre. So at the moment, this is very much a sort of Bengali Kolkata phenomenon, but then it gets complicated because of Wajid Ali Shah, who was the last Nawab of Lucknow, and in 1856 he went into exile to Kolkata and was based in Kolkata for the following 30 years in a new court he built called Metiburuj. And we now know quite a lot about what was happening at Metiburuj, and that's mostly what the book I'm working on is about. And when you go through the Urdu language histories of this court, what you find is that he curated a whole collection of musicians and dancers and singers. And he's remembered that way. He's remembered as being a pioneer of North Indian classical music, Hindustani music. But he also hired dance teachers to teach the royal women there Kempta and another Bengali genre, Jhumar. So he was bringing in Bengali dance instructors, and he was fascinated with them. And he wrote a whole lot about music and dance while he was there, including a set of sketches which he had written, sort of comic sketches, that were designed for groups called Bhands, which there's a sort of Band revival happening at the moment in some parts of India. But these were comic actors who combined sort of physical comedy, slapstick, music and dance. And he wrote a whole set of sketches for them where they would take on a particular role, like a water carrier or something, and then they would sing a song. Anyway, so these were all written by him, and he wrote one sketch about the Kempta dancer. So the Band actor takes the form of a Kemptiwali, that is, tying up his sari and decorating himself with all the Bengali ornaments. And then he says, Bengali Kemptiwali, dance like this. His companions say, like what? And then the following is danced with a rhythm and sung with a melody. And then he provides us with a song. So remember, this is still written in Urdu script, and he's trying to do Bengali. So, Arditana shohite nare, ami eki obolata kalonari, ekalo guri ekalo ki ami, shonkele shuno deki ami, eki he upo ki bonachori. What's interesting is he wrote quite a lot in Bengali, and a lot of the time it's very bad Bengali and slides into Urdu or Hindi or Braj Bhasha in quite a few places. But nonetheless, this is a very important moment. This song itself wasn't written by Wajid Ali Shah. He had borrowed it from his wife, Khas Mahal, who was the leading queen of the royal house of Lucknow. And she wrote a whole set of lyrics in Bengali. This was originally designed for a different genre, Dadra, and then it's been brought in and stuck into this text so that in the royal court, a group of actors can represent the Kemptiwali. Now, I think this is particularly interesting because it complicates our sense of what music from Lucknow means. It also complicates the sense of elite and popular music when popular music is actually being very popular street music, is being very specifically choreographed in a royal palace and is being written about by highly sophisticated kings and queens and music connoisseurs. It sort of creates a whole set of problems about how this genre is being transformed. What is also important about this moment is that it has a whole set of ramifications for the Bengali dancers of Kempta. I can say that, I believe, because one Bengali dancer called Nanhi went to perform in a royal fair at Rampur on the other side of the subcontinent. And she went over, and we know about her because there was one Urdu poet, Mirya Ali Jan Sahib, who wrote a really satirical, often quite dirty review of the whole festival and went through giving accounts of all of the people who had attending it, all the musicians, all the puppeteers, everyone. And then he picks up on Nanhi. And he says, the cheery pundit claps his hands and says, I cannot tell. Is she fair or is she dark? the Brahmin's sister-in-law gets embarrassed by this dance. Nanhi, a package of magic, she's a Kolkata girl. This Kempter, they don't know it or dance it. It's some dance from the East. Over here, they don't dance it. So what's particularly nice is it's very scathing. The people are very shocked by it, just as we were reading about before and other references to it. It's very much associated with a Calcutta phenomenon, with this Eastern, i.e. Bengali style. Again, it's very much about her physicality. Is she fair or is she dark? It's very crude. But again, when you look at the image of Nanhi, her dress and her hairstyle is incredibly Lucknow. And this is very interesting because, again, Wajid Ali Shah is already ensconced in Kolkata. He's already dictating the fashions and the trends. And he's picking up Bengali fashions, like Kempter, and he's reinterpreting them. And now the Bengalis, who used to do this dance and still do it, are adapting and making themselves more and more Lucknow in appearance. So there's a really interesting conversation happening there. And again, you know, this is unclear exactly when Nanhi was performing, but there she is, a Bengali dancer who, according to all of our sources, was a sort of low-level, frivolous dance, nothing to be taken seriously. And she's doing a tour across the subcontinent and getting picked up by all of these poets, and people are talking about it. So it's a very interesting story of exchange, given that this is the period which we normally think of as reform campaigns, morality, let's marginalize female performers. And sources like this really demonstrate that it's just much more complicated. And you could have something that, yes, by some people's standards was very scandalous and morally unspeakable, but it was still really popular. And I think that's intriguing. I won't go into it now because I am short on time, but there's this whole extra story about how the Bengali Kempter then moves into Hindi. It pops up in a whole set of Hindi songbooks, and I won't go into detail. If you're interested, I can talk about it. But the basic takeaway that I've gathered from looking through all of these songbooks in Hindi is two things, actually. So first of all, there's a lot of uncertainty in this period about what to call musical forms. So now we're very used to this idea of genre, and we're very used to the idea of a rag, and we're very used to the idea of a tal, and sometimes a tune. Kempter is sort of all of those things, according to which book you look at. Sometimes people say, oh, it's a rag, but they don't actually mean a rag. They mean rag as song. Sometimes they do mean it as a rag, and they're just very confused. Sometimes they say, yes, no, this is a tal, this is a rhythm. Sometimes they say it's a tune. There's a lot of uncertainty and flexibility with all of these forms in the 19th century. The other big interesting thing is there are some verses which appear in devotional songbooks, books of hymns. And again, you think, okay, we know that in this period, a lot of songs stop being popular, get taken into devotional bhakti repertoires, and they get sanitized, and they get cleaned up, and all of the eroticism gets taken away. And I've read some of these, and I've been shocked at some of the lyrics. So no, the cleanup job doesn't always happen, and there are lots of hymn books which are incredibly salacious, but I don't have time to talk about them. What I do want to talk about is just how this variety is just so remarkable, and why you can't talk about a single history of Kempter. Because all of this is happening in Kolkata, over then in Rampur, there's a Lucknow influence, and then it's spreading into Hindi all over the place. But there are other sides to it. One of these dimensions is what happens in alternative forms of Bengali language. So I've been looking through a whole set of books in the British Library, which are written in a dialect of Bengali, which sometimes people call Dobashi, sometimes they call it Musulmani Bangla, and it's considered to be a literary, but also popular, and then eventually quite almost communalist form of the Bengali language, which leans more towards Arabic and Persian and Islamic themes. So that's why it's sometimes called Mushramani Bangla. And I love looking at these books, particularly because the writing goes like normal Bengali, left to right, as in conventional standard Bengali, it goes left to right. But then the pages go the other way, so you read it like an Urdu book from back to front, effectively. You know. And anyway, and so I like things like that. I just think it's such an interesting object, and all of these books, you know, you dip into them, and it just raises a million questions. Kempter pops up in these books, but it's very different, which is intriguing, and I'll say why it's so intriguing. But I'll give you two very quick examples. One is from this one, Shito Boshonter Kecha, and Kecha is kissa, so a tail. Oh, wow, this finger is amazing. And this tale is an entertaining narrative. It's written in verse form, and then it will explain what's happening, it will give the story, and then it will bring in a song. And a lot of these songs are in Kempter or are Kempter, but they're not particularly salacious, and they can't really be sung or performed outside of the story because they just don't make sense, because they're really just reiterating exactly what's happened in the story. So I'll give you one example, just showing how specific and storytelling they are. I think I'll read it in a really bad British accent, so apologies. So, Gan Ragini Kempta, Tomra Dubai, Hoye Jao Bonachari, Kujia Dore Ali Doi Borkari, Doria Bokari Tare Halaur Kori, Arkuna Lia de Kaibo, Bacha Hujuri. So you two brothers go and live in the forest, hunting and searching, go find two goats, taking those goats, go make them halal, and then take the blood and show it, O King, Your Highness. So very storytelling, not really the kind of thing that you could sing in any other context, definitely not erotic anymore, not something that you could easily dance to in a suggestive way either. I've got one other example from Joshanama, so the Book of the Soiree, also 1873. And this book is really intriguing and hard to read, and I'm struggling with it. It says that it's a Bengali retelling of a Hindi text. It contains songs in lots of different languages, particularly in Hindi, and then sometimes in what's called Islamic language. So it will often say, Gan Islami Boshai. And I'm not quite sure what that means. One thing when you go through it is there's a big section of question-answer, so Sawal Jawab, which is a question and answer session between a religious leader, the peer, the teacher, and his murid, his disciple. And this goes back and forth. And the question and answers are set in Ar Kempter and Kempter, which is quite interesting. And it's really not salacious. So I'll just give you one example. Let's try, again, apologies for the Britishness. Pir bole shobash murid mor, chemon chavar tera temoni otor, bole pir tera kodome jore, bayat bolinu per gan gai shore. And then we get the song, which is Gan Bangla, so a Bengali song, in Tar Kempter and in Ragini Kambaj. For people who are really interested in music in this period, Kambaj was so popular in Bengal in the second half of the 19th century. It's just everywhere. Anyway, so the song is very devotional, really. Guru, deliver me across your shore. Unstable, I'm floating across your river. I came into this world a slave. If you allow it, I will be released. But I'm in short supply of merit, only decline ahead. Give me a little more grace, then you could take your inventory. The 6 adversaries would draw back. The 6 adversaries are sort of the 6 passions, the 6 cardinal passions. It's almost like the 7 deadly sins in a way. Reaching your sandbank, pull me towards you, O Guru. Buddha's distress would be removed for fear that the enemy awakes. Again, still work in progress with this, but what's interesting here is I think the song would have existed in an earlier collection. It's been incorporated into this text. It's been given Tal Kempter. Tal Kempter is therefore understood as something popular. It's not necessarily bothered about these other connotations of it being salacious or overly sexualized. That doesn't seem to be an issue for these editors. But what's intriguing about looking at these books is, they're published in 1873 and they're published out of Kolkata. So they're published around the corner from where Vajid Ali Shah and his wife were using Kempter in their pantomimes. They're also around the corner from where these Kempter dancers are performing in the streets and performing in rich men's houses. So it's actually multiple uses of this form Kempter, even in the same, space of Kolkata. So it's actually incredibly complicated to try and think through all of these different uses and applications. My final example, just to show how varied it is, comes out of Peter Manuel's work. What's interesting is Kempter, it's incredibly versatile, it's covering lots of different ground. It's never considered classical until it gets to the Caribbean. And for this, we have to remember the forms of transference that happened through indentured labour schemes, particularly between 1845 and 1917, when lots of indentured labourers from northern and eastern India were taken to the Caribbean and settled in Trinidad, British Guiana, Jamaica and Martinique. And Peter Manuel has written some really fascinating research about these movements and the fashioning of a sort of Caribbean, South Asian classical music, Indo-Caribbean music, if you will. And what's interesting is a lot of genres that go across are things that we would recognize in Indian classical music, like Dhrupad and Khayal, Dhrupad and Tumri, but they mean totally different things there and have taken on a very different life, a very different sound, and there's a whole debate about why these names travel, how they traveled. It's not clear whether workers from Bihar were there with classically trained musicians and they just brought the music with them, or whether these songbooks I'm talking about also traveled, and in the early 20th century, people in the Caribbean are reading these books, they're seeing all of these songs called Kempter, and they're saying, right, let's do a genre of music called Kempter, because Kempter is what is clearly a big musical form. And Kempter takes on a different life, and I'm going to play you one example, Sukhdeo Sukhraj's Mora Radha Banshi from the 1970s, which is a particularly beautiful example of Kempter as a Caribbean classic genre. No. Let's go there. so this song is available online, so I encourage you to track it down and listen to it. So just to go back to my original question, just to wrap up, how useful is it to think of things going viral before the digital age? So clearly things weren't happening overnight, definitely, but songs, music, ideas about music, opinions about music were traveling incredibly quickly. You do end up with a genre which we usually think of as this sort of grotty, low-level street music happening in a playboy's garden in mid-century Kolkata. Now it's traveling, it's across the subcontinent, it's getting picked up in all kinds of different contexts, from highly religious sectarian contexts in some of the Hindi examples, to royal fairs, to the dramas of the Nawab of Lucknow. It's being used in all sorts of different ways and being redeployed. It's also happening quite quickly because you get a whole series of publications happening in quite quick succession as people get excited about using songbooks or instrument manuals. And more of this literature keeps getting produced, and then someone working in another language sees all of these songbooks and says, right, I'm also going to do songbooks. And then it sort of starts spreading that way as well. And in terms of geographical distance, I mean, I thought it was impressive that the dancing girl from Kolkata ends up performing in Rampur and gets immortalized there. But then, talking about going global, we do have this music being reinterpreted in the Caribbean under very different contexts. So this is still very much a work in progress, this project, but I think it's helping me try to understand how particular forms of printed books that we see now as just silent books were actually interesting ways of engaging with musical culture, consuming music, reapplying music, reinterpreting music in the same way that we would think of musical media today. And it's also, I think, raising a whole set of questions about what we think of as popular art and popular music. And a lot of the time when people talk about popular music, they're really concerned with a set of debates that have happened in Europe or the United States and North America from the 1950s onwards. And a lot of the language we've inherited to talk about popular art forms sort of stems from very specific musical scenes. And then if you actually try to think through, well, what was popular music in 1870s Kolkata, you actually get a whole different set of questions and priorities. Anyway, so I'll finish there, but thank you so much. Thank you for coming this evening, and yeah, feel free to ask questions. Oh, there we go.
What role did music play in, or if it had played any role in sort of revolutionizing sort of society apart from just music?
Mm-hmm.
Music evolved from, if I correct, from Kolkata.
Mm-hmm.
So how did it have an impact on social aspects of people's life?
That's interesting.
How powerful is it as a medium of change?
So this is the thing. I mean, with a lot of Bengali genres or songwriters had huge political legacies, obviously, and it's very. I think that's one of the things that draws a lot of people towards Bengali music, to see this conversation between society and the art form. That happens a lot.
Most of the popular Bengali poets and stuff, they use poetry as a form of revolution.
Exactly. Yeah. don't think it's happened with Kempter. That's the thing.
That's all.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's happened.
Purely musical.
So it was never politicized, I don't think. I don't think it was ever really used for political campaigns. But it wasn't, but when you look at these things, you know, was it just about music? Well, that means it depends what you think the music's for, because a lot of these were about entertainment, definitely, and enjoying the music for the music's own sake, or enjoying the dance for its own sake. But then there are also other reasons people are using Kempter. The Dobashi text, you know, I think that was really used. It was understood as a text on how to practice Islam correctly. And so it had a teaching function, and it did influence society in the sense that it gave you, you know, these are the correct morals you should have. This is the correct ethos, the spiritual ethos you should have in practicing Islam. And then some of the Hindi examples, again, the music is being used in a very specific Hindu sacred context. There was one collection which by a Hindi poet called Shyam Sake, and that collection was published out of Ayodhya, and it was written for the use of a Ram devotional sect who are still there in Kanak Bhavan temple. And so, yeah, some of these things, they weren't just being used for the entertainment or pleasure value. They did have applications for religious communities. But no, answering your question, I don't think it was ever politicized. Yeah. Probably because it was seen as too light, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. Good for the hips, but not good for political movements. Yeah. Yes.
I'm kind of wondering about this other form which has a certain kind of absence in printed literature in 19th century called Keud, and it is often kind of used together with Kempter, Keud and Kempter. And even if you read Vidya Shundar, where Vidya is trying to persuade Shundar not to go and saying that I will sing the Keud for you if you stay back. So I'm just trying to
That's interesting.
think how far do these go into the Mongol Kapu tradition in medieval Bengal, and do we find traces of Keud and Kempter there? And the other question is about basically three strands of understanding one performance genre, which is how it crystallizes as a notion, and there is an open-endedness about it, and there is this idea of absence in printed literature. And the video that you showed from Purulia resonates so well with the other dance form from the region called Nachni. Urmila Sarkar has written extensively on the Nachni tradition. So what is being continued as a kind of legacy of these performance forms, and how far the crystallization of the idea of Kempter as something that, and again, it's open-ended because there's no understanding of whether it's a tal or a rag, or, which you pointed out. So these two questions, basically.
Really interesting questions. They're questions I'm going to have to follow up rather than answer conclusively here. But you're right, because there's, I mean, Shramanto Banerjee and other scholars who have looked at Kempter, they often pair it with Keul, like you say. And I wonder, I mean, I haven't spotted much Keul, no. But I wonder if there's a similar project that one could do for that genre. I wonder, because I think a lot of the time people, you know, just don't look through the songbooks, basically. So it's hard to know what is actually absent and what just hasn't been spotted yet. But no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the Keul side of it. Does it, a really interesting suggestion about, you know, does it go back into earlier forms of literature like Mongol Kabul? I haven't spotted it there, but again, the searchery goes on. I mean, one thing that's intriguing is, you know, so it's circulating in Hindi, etc. But I was thinking, well, was it there before all of these Hindi songbooks? And particularly because of the Caribbean connection, a lot of people assume that that Kemta was a form of sort of popular folk song in Bhojpuri-speaking regions, which would make sense in many ways because a lot of the people who end up in Indo-Caribbean doing this stuff are Bhojpuri speakers. And then, of course, we're not a million miles away from Bengal, so it'd be quite possible to think of Kemta being there. But I haven't really found it. And I've been looking through manuscript, still 19th century, but manuscripts of song collections that people out in the field were making from sort of Bihar and Hindi-speaking areas where, you know, written by Indian scribes, and they would just sit and write down all of these songs. I haven't spotted Kemta there. I haven't spotted it in colonial writings like Grierson about all of the folk songs of Bihar. So there is this interesting question about absence, because just because it's not being written down, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So tricky. The Nachni tradition, I'll bother you and ask you for that reference you mentioned, because yeah, this project, the Indo-Caribbean thing is an aside, and really I go up to about 1910 with this, and then yeah, I'm sure there will be a whole extra set of debates and developments about what to do with these genres. And yeah, it could be that this crystallization of rural genres or folk genres, which I know you have pulled apart in so many different ways, I think that will be a later chapter of all of this. Yeah.
I think two references that could work for you if you're interested in working on Keu is Monomohan Boshu's Gitaboli and his unpublished diary, which is now published.
Oh, right, okay.
And it's called Prakashito Diary, and where he does talk about his brief stint in Benares, where he organized a Kobigan performance.
Okay.
So, and in his song collection, Gitaboli, he has something called the revised Keu. It's a very polished and revised and socially acceptable.
And when was he around? When was he doing this?
1870s or 80s.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes, please. Give me all those references. Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was constantly reminded of Keu when I was
Thank you. Yeah, I'll harass you and ask you for those sources, please. Yeah, they're great. Yes.
Before coming here, I was sort of very much in Shumanta Banerjee's mode of understanding Kemta as street dance, but obviously your presentation takes us beyond that framework. And what strikes me is that, you know, the label of the certain characteristics of a street dance kind of continues in some way or the other, even with Wajid Ali Shah's courtesan dancing and so forth. Okay, it's an elitist atmosphere in the palace, which is how you're reading it. But my thing is that how is he actually looked upon to have integrated the Nachni, the dancer, the street dancing tradition within the palace? So the agency of Wajid Ali is quite important and interesting. Given that he's bringing a lot of the prostitute associated Lucknowi dancing into Bengal, and obviously connecting the North Indian street dance come courtesan dancing. So if he wasn't actually bringing the courtesan prostitution elements and then seeing the Kemta tradition in Bengal, he wouldn't be sort of thinking of welding the two. And I think it has some kind of legacy there in terms of how he's refashioning Kemta and making it as if it's part of a nobler tradition. And then you can see how it's actually taken up by the indentured laborers. Again, they have a certain stigma. Who are the indentured laborers and what are they doing? They're going across the Kalapani, the sea, and they are taking with them the street dance. So that kind of reinvents and recreates in certain ways, which is why the framework of Kemta is still that popular tradition and not the elite tradition. So what is interesting with you is that you're looking at songbooks you're trying to look at how Khemta itself can be reconfigured in different ways rather than just a dance form. And therefore, so when you're actually comparing and contrasting and saying it's loose, one needs to also see what is this looseness and in what context it is.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
Otherwise, you can say that everything is open-ended because it's circulating in different forms. But you have to. What I'm saying is that the agency is equally important in different contexts, which complicates the historical connectivity in certain ways and how things are circulated, both as objects and as performance and as the character behind it. So I'm looking at the various ways how the popular characteristics of a street dance form kind of continues, although it is transferred in various elite circles. Which in popular memory, Khemta is associated with something. Oh, it's a street dance associated with certain kind of women. Of course, the whole issue of women's role in theatre in Bengal around that time was a big disputed morality. So I'm just trying to see how you link up, but at the same time, the role of the agency.
No, that's really, really interesting, and yeah, I still need to think through this, like you say, the sort of open-endedness, but qualify it and think through, what are the limits of the circulation in a way. And what you're suggesting, one of the limits is that there is this persistent connotation of, well, it's a street dance sort of thing. But I think it's interesting because I think some people are more or less oblivious to the fact that it has these connotations in some of the uses of it. And then I think other people do elevate it in some specific ways. So, for example, when Shyam Sakhe, the Hindu poet, is doing this within his sectarian tradition, I mean, he's really a very respected guru in his lineage. When he's bringing it in, it's still highly erotic, but it is being elevated in the sense that it's not eroticism being directed towards anyone, it's eroticism being directed towards God, and it's being used in a very specific temple context, and there's a particular kind of ennobling of it there. It is ennobled or elevated in the Caribbean, but under a totally different set of circumstances. I think it's almost coincidental, and I think a lot of these connotations are just dropped completely, and the name travels, but the rest of it doesn't really. And it takes on new connotations like nostalgia, for example, potentially. With Vajid Ali Shah, again, I mean, it's not just the fact that it's happening in an elite space like a palace. And I think often there are lots of assumptions made about Vajid Ali Shah and the music he was doing there. He wasn't really working with courtesans after he left Lucknow. The music that he was developing was just for his very substantial harem, because he married about 350 women, so he had plenty of women to train in music and dance. But they would not perform outside like courtesans, and that's one of the crucial things, because courtesans can go out and do it in the street, they can do it in the salon, they can do it on a gramophone recording if they really want to. Oh, it does appear on gramophone recordings, I should have mentioned that as well. But no, he's doing it in this very specific setting, and he's not really ennobling it at all. And I think this is one of the problems. We sort of think of, if it's in the street or in the public domain, it's a chotolok thing, it's a bawdy sense of humor of the masses, etc. And it will be lowbrow, etc. And it will have that sort of crass physicality about it. Whereas if something is, highbrow, it's going to be genteel, literally bodro, and it's going to be more refined in sensibilities or morality. And Vajid just complicates all of that. A lot of his sketches are disgusting, and they're really, really physical humor, dogs urinating in people's mouths. Sorry. And he's got a very, very physical sense of comedy, and he heard these rhythms and saw these dancers and thought, yes, we need that. And so I don't think its appearance in these literally royal settings is refining it or ennobling it or making it less popular, which is what I think you're also saying with this fact that the street dancer connotations are still there. But yes, I think the ennobling in the circulation isn't. We shouldn't assume or take for granted that things are kind of going up or down in their moral value or their aesthetic value even. But then it is being transformed. Nanhi is no longer someone who will only perform in Kolkata. She is someone who can cross the country, appear in Rampur. Everyone will say, what is she doing with her hips? But it has a different cachet because she's, she's got Lucknowi hair now. Yeah, so
in spite of the bad reviews she got, she managed to have some kind of...
Well, she's there, and she looks pretty glamorous in her image. When you compare her to some of the other singers, she's pretty glamorous. She's got, she definitely has a hairstylist in her crew. Mm-hmm.
I have one more question in terms of the methodology that you're employing.
Uh-huh.
I'm following from Shumanta Banerjee, who's the binary of the street and the parlor is very problematic because many of these forms, at least Kobigan was not a street form ever. It was performed in courtyards.
Yeah.
So how do you see Khemta there?
I agree with you, and I think that this is one of the real issues because, again, when you look at these Khemta references, people are stopping in the street when they hear it, but they're hearing it over the garden wall. It's being performed in people's gardens, elite people's gardens. This isn't, it's assumed that, these are public women and therefore they're public and their art is public. It's not public. They're being paid by the super elites and they're either performing it in their own kota or they're performing it in the super elites' gardens. So, yeah, I think it is a real problem. I think, his work is amazing and wonderful and brilliant and has shed light on lots of things. And I think the reason why we think of things like Khemta or Keor is because of people like him, really. A lot of it isn't about longer memories. It's because we're familiar with people talking about his work. But I think part of the issue is, he was writing at a period when people were really excited about what popular is and what popular music is, and there is this large ongoing debate about, is it a battleground between classes, is it a negotiation between classes, between spaces, and in the context of that bigger debate that was happening about what the popular is, his examples worked really, really well. But if you don't accept the terms of the debate, then actually, this street private thing doesn't quite add up. And I think, with something like Khemta, it's not a single form. No. It's not a dancing girl performing in the street. It's so many different things. So, yeah, you have to wipe clean your assumptions with it.
Yeah, because the issue of space is important. You refer to a quote from Hutum Kalipurshana Shingho, where he's referring, he's talking about Vidyasundar performance, which is actually a performance which happened in Nobin Boshu's theatre in Belgachia, where he used the whole house as a set and the audience would move from one room to the other for each scene. So, it's again not parlor, but not street, but a completely different setting which is coming up with this introduction of theatre. And a lot of theatre song booklets would also have songs in Khemta Tal. So there is an overlap of space, of genre, and it needs a lot.
And the printed paraphernalia that goes with it. Yeah.
I had a question because it's vertically shot. How did the Tal Khemta actually percolate into the genre of Thumri?
I haven't spotted that. No, I haven't. So again, that's a really good question because I haven't seen it. I need to look back because he produced 3 songbooks in Urdu with these Bengali lyrics in it. I need to check through. I didn't really recognize Khemta as being a tal that he was using. And for him, he sees Khemta as something a Khemtawali sings. So he's seeing it more as a song type rather than as a tal. I mean, this is also, that's a really good question, because again, with the drumming manual, this is very interesting, because in a lot of other books about rhythm and tal, you'll never see Kempter. It doesn't really pop up. In the early 19th century, you know, there are some really formidable books that are very influential about what classical music is, what are the musical forms. One of them is the Songit Torongo of 1818, and that was a very important book in Bengali. And Kempter's never discussed. It's really just not seen as a mainstream tal, and it's not seen as something particularly, definitely not canonical. You know, they don't really give it that status. But then suddenly in the 1870s, you know, he's like, Ara Kempter, Kashmiri Kempter. So it's funny how it has its moment, but quite late.
Well, Tagore did compose few songs in Ara Kempter.
Huh.
I don't remember whether he did anything in Kempter, but...
There is a reference, song in Kempter in Kalmribaya.
Yeah. Interestingly, there's a village named Kempter near Raina in Bardhaman district.
Oh, right. Okay. Maybe that is the key.
Actually, Ram Dasharatha song, one of the more complicated songs.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Great. Fantastic. Thank you. So useful. Tagore's.
I don't know that much about music, but I was going to ask some what you mentioned, but it does this Kempter music show through people like Tagore or Nosrul, you know, because they come forward a little bit later, is it? And I was going to ask, is it known in Bangladesh or Bengal today?
I'm not the best person to ask. I mean, well, we've heard that it pops up in Tagore's work anyway, which is interesting. I hadn't found that one. And then it's there. And what's interesting is when I say to people, "Oh, I'm doing a project about Kempter," people go,
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, and that kind of continues. And despite all its forms and transformations,
Yeah.
that tag never goes.
It doesn't go, no.
Popular discourse in Bengali, people still say Kempter niche.
Kempter as a word itself is derogative in many ways.
When I was documenting Kobigan performances, performers would themselves say at the end of each performance, this was a Kobigan, this was not Keu. So it's a good one. So they themselves distinguish between what is good and bad, and it's kind of received as a legacy. And print definitely has a great role to play in this transmission.
Which is interesting because, there's a history of kind of possibility and creativity with this and pushing it into new directions, but also there's a history of aspects of it being very much forgotten, and this kind of persistent narrative that, it's not a nice genre. You know, and that's why I love the very first reference I found to it, the 1841, where it's a species of not over modest performance, which kind of sums up the whole thing,
And it's very interesting how the publications from Bongyo Krishtiyo Sampradaya, they were also including genres like Kobigan and other Torja, but no mention of any Kempter or Keu anywhere. It's a very clean publication.
There's
1860s, I think.
there's an early Bengali songbook